Welcome to the Oxygen Advantage podcast with your host, Oxygen Advantage founder Patrick McKeown. With the Oxygen Advantage podcast, we aim to show how functional breathing is an essential part of a healthy and well-balanced lifestyle. Each episode, we meet experts in their field from around the world and talk about their lives, their experiences, and how they learned the importance of breathing. Join us and get inspired. Get the Oxygen Advantage.
Hello, Patrick McKeown here. Welcome back to the Oxygen Advantage podcast. We're now in season 7. We have a really special episode, and this is the conversations of different people that I've had over the last 2 years. I've been speaking with Ihor Verys, who came in as a first finisher on Barclay Marathons, regarded as the toughest ultramarathon on earth, and what was his secret weapon. James Nestor, of course, on breathing and his book Breath. George Dallam, who has been investigating nasal breathing and physical exercise for the past 20 years. Rothenberg, bringing together breathing and yoga, and what did the original yogis talk about and discuss and describe breathing? How did they breathe? What's the difference between the breathing and yoga of old and the breathing of yoga today? I also spoke with Dr. Bryan about nitric oxide, that amazing molecule that's produced in different parts of the body, including the nose. And when you breathe through the nose, you can harness nitric oxide, and you get so many amazing benefits of it. So thanks very much for listening to the podcast over the year. And we'd also love to know, what would you like to hear from us in 2026? So drop a note into comments. Tell us what you think about the podcast. Where can we improve it? What conversations would you like to have? And we'll do our best to deliver them. So for now, enjoy the podcast and the conversation.
A doctor friend of mine suggested I attend a breathing class because I had had a number of respiratory problems. I was wheezing a bit. I had had pneumonia for the past few years in a row, bronchitis, you name it. I was even snoring a little bit. So I attended this breathing class and had this extremely strange physiological reaction. I just sitting there cross-legged in a room with other people, breathing very slowly and then very fast over and over again. Within about 15 to 20 minutes of this, I noticed that I was sweating. My entire body was sweating. So there were sweat blotches on my jeans, on my shirt, on my sweater. My hair was sopping wet. And I thought, wow, that was a pretty interesting experience. Went and asked my doctor friends about it. And they said, oh, you had a fever. You were wearing a jacket that was too big, which is all false.
The title is The New Science of a Lost Art. And I find that interesting because I know whenever I talk to a stranger about breathing, their eyes will often glass over and they're not too interested. And, that's often the way it is. In your interpretation, why is it a lost art?
I think it's because of the medicine, that you're prescribing, air. There are very few people that think how we inhale and exhale, those 25,000 breaths a day, will affect the skeleton of our faces, how it will affect our asthma, how it will affect our allergies, our snoring, our sleep apnea, our hypertension, our psoriasis. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And everyone is extremely skeptical that something so basic that is within our power can be so transformative. And I certainly was skeptical as well, which is why I was hesitant to go into this world and explore these subjects at the beginning, because I thought, well, what if this is a complete bust, right? What if these stories that these freedivers were telling me are completely fabricated? Or they're pseudoscience? So it took me years of research, and luckily I was able to find leaders in the field, top institutions, Harvard, Stanford, University of Pennsylvania, who were doing this research. So I was able to learn from them. They took me into their worlds and showed me their science, and then showed me studies from 20 years ago, 50 years ago, and 100 years ago. All of these studies were saying the same thing, but for some reason, nobody really listened. Which I still, that's a bit of a mystery to me. When the science is solid and there's a century of it, and yet still people have been hesitant about accepting it. And it started with a conversation I had with a biological anthropologist who look at the changes in the human body. I was talking to people who were looking at the changes in the human face. And they asked me a rhetorical question, and it was, why do humans have crooked teeth? And I was like, well, we have crooked teeth because of genetics, right? We're just inherited. Like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So it doesn't make any sense that you can go into the wild and look at 5,400 different mammals, and they all have perfectly straight teeth. Or you can take a skeleton, a human skeleton from 1,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago, or a million years ago, and they have straight teeth. And they never needed to get their wisdom teeth removed. They never needed braces. They have perfectly straight teeth. So I started thinking about this question more and more, and then they started explaining to me that in the last 400 years, 300, 400 years, because of our diet and the softness of our diet, our mouths have grown so small that our teeth no longer fit. So they're growing crooked. Now, there's another problem with having a mouth that's too small. Your airway's smaller, which means it's harder to breathe. And if your mouth is also small, the very top of your mouth, the V arch there, V-shaped arch, can penetrate into the sinuses and can inhibit nasal breathing. So because of these changes, humans are now the most plugged up animals on Earth. This partly explains why a conversation I had with Ann Kearney down at Stanford, a breathing therapist down there, and she mentioned that the nose is really a use it or lose it organ. So she looked at 200 patients with laryngectomies who had a hole drilled in their throat for one reason or the other, mostly due to cancer. And she found that from 2 to 2 years, their nose is completely 100% plugged up. So the less the nose is used, the less the nose can be used. She was a chronic mouth breather herself. This is someone, breathing therapist at Stanford. And she was scheduled for surgery. And she said, I don't want surgery. I'm going to try to fix this myself. So she started using sleep tape. She really focused on breathing through her nose. A couple months later, she is now habitual nose breather. I had a CAT scan of my nose. It is a complete mess. Deviated septum way over here. Concha bullosa, these growths. I mean, the ENT, Dr. Jayakar Nayak, who helped me with the study and some of the research for the book, he said, you are a perfect candidate for surgery. Like, if I saw this, you're a perfect candidate. I thought I'd take another route and start habitually breathing from my nose. And I feel absolutely no need for that surgery. This is my personal experience here. I exercise all the time, pretty high volumes. And I don't feel like I need more air. I know that my nose is moderating and allowing me to gain about 20% more oxygen breathing through my nose. So that's 20% less air I would have to take in through my mouth. So you start doing the math here, and it just makes sense. What really throws people off about the Wim Hof technique is the benefit. And the benefit is you're stimulating adrenaline, you're stimulating norepinephrine, you're stimulating cortisol. And we've learned in our lives that having these things in your body is bad. Cortisol's bad. Get that cortisol down. Norepinephrine, get that down. Adrenaline, like if you really need it, but you don't want to run on adrenaline. You need to get that down. But what people don't understand about this is when you consciously do this, when you willingly place yourself into a state for 20 minutes to hold your breath, this has tremendous benefits. And if you look at people with autoimmune diseases, incurable autoimmune diseases, that goes type 1 diabetes,
rheumatoid arthritis,
irritable
bowel syndrome,
psoriasis, eczema. These people, nothing else had worked for them. Once they learned how to control their nervous system, they were able to help control their immune system. Once they were able to control their immune system, so many of the symptoms of these chronic conditions were abated. And it's the combination of occasional cold therapy, but mostly breathing. And I say mostly breathing because I've gotten some flack from Wim Hof people. They say, no, the cold therapy, that's the most important thing. Breathing is secondary. It's not. If you look at other heavy breathing techniques like Sudarshan Kriya, which is the same exact thing, not same exact, pretty close. Heavy breathing to very slow breathing. Heavy breathing to very slow breathing has the same, almost the same list of benefits, and helps cure or lessen the symptoms of almost all the same conditions as Wim Hof. I would consider holotropic, once you have the foundations of healthy breathing, so you know how to breathe slow, you're going to be breathing less, you're always breathing through your nose, big exhale, then you can go this next step up. And I call it in the book, it's the last section of the book, it's called Breathing Plus, because you need to have that foundation before you go into it, because it gets pretty wild. But I was interested enough in it, and I tried it out, talked to Stan Grof, who invented this in the 70s, and looked at the science to it. And what I did find was so interesting was that a lot of the therapists that I talked to said, breathing like this oxygenates the body. That's why you're having these hallucinations. That's why you're able to remove yourself from normal consciousness and go into your subconscious and unconscious thought. But what you're doing is it's the opposite. Mm-hmm. So if you're denying yourself and your brain of oxygen up to 40%, mm-hmm. which is an incredible amount, that's not to say this isn't therapeutic. It's completely therapeutic, but to be able to understand this from a scientific perspective and to acknowledge that you're not oxygenating your body, you're depriving that, but there is a benefit in consciously depriving yourself of oxygen.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a common question, but I've always had an interest in science and medicine, even going back to high school. But out of high school, I went to the University of Texas at Austin. I got a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, and then I went to LSU School of Medicine, and it was there that I was introduced to this whole field and new science around nitric oxide. This is a Nobel Prize had just been awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. So, the scientific community was really excited about this new discovery, a relatively new discovery. And, early on in my PhD work, I met Lou Ignarro, who came and gave a lecture on nitric oxide. He had just won the Nobel Prize and came to the LSU School of Medicine and gave a lecture, and kind of his story, personal story of discovery of, how he discovered that EDRF is nitric oxide. And, I had a chance to have dinner with him that night, and he made a very profound statement that I'll never forget. And he says, Nathan, he goes, this is such an important discovery. He goes, if anybody or any company can figure out how to restore the production and natural signaling of nitric oxide, it'll change the world. Because we know that most chronic diseases are associated with a loss of nitric oxide production. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And so I go, wow, that's really a profound statement. And, I worked with a pharmacologist, Martin Feelish, who was my PhD mentor and advisor. And, we got to work. And, even as a student, I think I finished my PhD in about 2 years, published, I think, 6 first author papers, because we'd figured out how to detect nitric oxide gas at physiological levels. So that gave our research group a very powerful tool to make new discoveries around nitric oxide. Once it's produced, where does it go? What does it become? And what does it do? And then I went to Boston, did a 2-year fellowship at BU Medical Center, and really just still trying to understand the vascular production of nitric oxide and how do we restore the production of this. And then from there, I was recruited by Fred Murad, one of the other guys who won the Nobel Prize, to join the faculty at University of Texas Medical School in Houston. And, we were at a center called the Institute of Molecular Medicine, where we were charged to really understand the mechanism of disease to the extent that we could fix it through development of rational therapies. So that was, I was introduced to this field in the late 90s, early 2000s, and, that's all I've done for the past 25 years.
It's a really relative recent discovery, but I also believe that when they first taught about nitric oxide and when Ignarro started giving talks to a conference, it wasn't always best received. Nitric oxide was, it was kind of dismissed, really, and then it was embraced.
No, for sure. I go back to the late 80s when they first administered nitric oxide gas to premature babies with pulmonary hypertension. And, I was very fortunate to know Warren Zapal, the anesthesiologist, and a lot of his team at Mass General and Harvard Medical School, where they were administering nitric oxide gas. And, they said, because if you have a cylinder of nitric oxide gas, very clearly on that cylinder, it has a skull and crossbones and it says poison. So you can imagine the general population, when you were going to administer the most vulnerable patient in the world, a premature baby that's, living on the brink of life or death, and you're going to administer a gas that clearly says poison on it. But now fast forward, and we know that inhalative nitric oxide therapy for premature babies with pulmonary hypertension is very effective. And it's not only effective, it's very safe at the doses you administer. So now we know that, those are paradigm changing observations and discoveries. And that's why nitric oxide is so important, because now we need to figure out, how do we deliver this in an outpatient setting? And how do we restore the natural production of nitric oxide? I think that's what you've done such a fantastic job of doing, is, teaching people that just nasal breathing can activate and stimulate the production of this very important molecule.
And I was thinking about, like, if this is a virus that's transmitted airborne via water particles, it doesn't really make sense for us to be going around with our mouth open. Either the person who is infected, because they're breathing more particles out into the atmosphere, but also for the person that's close to them, if they have the mouth open, they're bypassing the nose. And people kind of objected to what I was saying. And I was saying, listen, your nose is kind of the first part of defense. So will you list the functions of why this gas is very important? And it was only in 1991 that the nitric oxide was first identified on the exhaled breath of the human being. So it's still relatively recent. What are the functions in terms of nasal nitric oxide? And do you think there may be other functions of nitric oxide when it comes to sleep apnea, but yet people aren't really talking about them?
No, absolutely. Look, we have to understand the enzymology and the biochemistry of that reaction, because there's an enzyme, the same enzyme that's found in our endothelial cells, and those are the cells that line all blood vessels throughout the body. That enzyme is also found in our epithelial cells. In fact, the highest concentration of this enzyme is found in our nasal epithelium. So we have to focus on how does that enzyme become active, so that when we activate it through nasal breathing, it actually produces nitric oxide gas. And we understand the enzymology and the biochemistry of that reaction. So the problem is, in older patients, when we have endothelial dysfunction, you also have epithelial dysfunction. And you've probably seen this in the published literature, that young, healthy people, if you do nasal breathing, you get exhaled nitric oxide, or you get nitric oxide that we can detect in the exhaled breath. But if you take older patients with hypertension, diabetes, erectile dysfunction, they can do nasal breathing, but there's less nitric oxide being produced that we can detect in the exhaled breath. And the reason for that is because their enzyme isn't functional. So that's really the work I've been doing for the past 20 or 25 years. How do we fix the enzyme? How do we restore the oral microbiome so that the body is optimized to naturally produce this molecule? And so if we can recouple the enzyme, now when we do nasal breathing, we can detect more nitric oxide. And when it's produced in the sinuses, again, it's just like giving it through a nasal cannula. It's delivered into the lower airways. It dilates the blood vessels. It matches ventilation to perfusion. And it's a normal physiological response.
Point two that you made was, say, erectile dysfunction. And I'm sure there's plenty of men my age, and I think you're in close enough age to myself, age 50s, but even age 40 plus. And of course, this is going to grab their attention, So you were talking about nitric oxide and the role, but you said that it's the canary in the coal mine. So what does it mean? So if a man, say, for example, is waking up in the morning, but he doesn't have an erection, and normally it should be that a man is waking up, that they have morning wood, to have an erection. But if he doesn't, what's the bigger picture there?
Well, it means he has systemic disease. Because, again, if you're not dilating the blood vessels of the sex organs, then that tells us that vascular bed and the blood vessel can't make nitric oxide. But it's not unique to the vascular bed of the sex organs. If you have endothelial dysfunction in the blood vessels that perfuse the sex organs, that same dysfunction occurs in the blood vessels of the heart, the brain, the liver, the kidneys. It's a systemic problem. And so we have to, and if you treat it as a lifestyle disorder, then it's grossly underappreciating the systemic nature of that disease. And so we have to focus, and we have to get physicians and urologists and endocrinologists and primary care docs to recognize that as a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency And today there's enough data showing that men with erectile dysfunction have a higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, and rapid progression of cardiovascular disease. And it is the canary in the coal mine because, that analogy goes back to, if there's, poisonous gas deep in these mines that send a canary in there. If the canary died, they're more sensitive to it. Then it tells us, well, we might not be responsive to it or notice it, but there's something bad happening, and we must, mitigate the situation.
So the entire, is it 50,000 miles of blood vessels in the human body are influenced at, in other words, they're not as dilated, or there may be, is there an accumulation of plaque? Is it like, what's a little bit more?
Well, the blood vessels are vasoreactive, right? So the blood vessel dilation is a balance of vasodilators versus vasoconstrictors. Nitric oxide is the main vasodilator. So if we lose the ability to produce it, we no longer dilate the blood vessels. So now we have basically adults have a finite amount of blood, volume of blood pumping through these 50,000 miles of blood vessels. And so if we're chronically constricted, then we've got that same fluid going through smaller pipes. And that's just basic physics, right? Pressure will go up. Pressure has to go up. It's fundamental laws of physics. So if we can restore the production of nitric oxide, we can dilate the blood vessels. Now we've got the same volume of blood going through wider pipes. Pressure comes down. Yeah. And high blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for the #1 killer of men and women worldwide, which is still cardiovascular disease. So nitric oxide fixes the physics problem of hypertension. And that's why it's so important, because if we can eliminate the #1 risk factor for the #1 killer of men and women worldwide, think about what that does for public health.
Okay, so the production of nitric oxide, how to do that? Or increase the production?
Well, I think you have to stop doing the things that inhibit it. So get rid of fluoride in your toothpaste, stop using mouthwash, and if you're on antacids, you have to get off of antacids.
Yep.
And then once you stop doing the things that disrupt it, the other big thing is sugar. Sugar leads to, sugar is sticky. It sticks to proteins and causes the enzyme to become dysfunctional. So you got to eliminate including alcohol. And so you have to eliminate sugar, go to a low glycemic index, eliminate sugar from your supplements, from your diet. And then once you eliminate those things, then you can do nasal breathing. You can do moderate physical exercise, 20 to 30 minutes of sunlight. There's certain wavelengths of lights and frequency that can release nitric oxide or stimulate nitric oxide release from metals and make that a labile source of nitric oxide. And then, when all else fails, we've developed technology that does it for you. So if your body can't make it, then we have product technology that provides it for you.
I'm often intrigued, all of the sports medicine scientists in the world, and very, very few have shown any interest in breathing in and out through the nose. You are one of a handful. I cannot think of any more than maybe 5. And I don't even think there is 5 sports medicine scientists who have investigated nose breathing during physical movement. So why do you think that's so?
I think there are some reasons for that. The first thing is our field was premised on the idea that you would breathe from your mouth, going back into about the 1940s, when this field started to really emerge with stress testing and the ability to use a system to analyze expired gas so you could calculate metabolically how much energy you're using, oxygen consumed, CO2 expelled, all that sort of thing. From the get-go, we use systems where we clip the nose and you breathe through the mouth because people just presume that that's what you had to do. And there's a reason for that. It's a very natural thing that if you begin to exert yourself beyond a level that you're accustomed to, you achieve a little higher production of CO2. That's an outcome of increased metabolism. And your body, essentially, and your brain, nervous system essentially tells you to deal with that most successfully. And the easiest way to reduce that is simply to increase your ventilation. So, of course, we can increase our ventilation quite a bit when we breathe through our mouths. So we develop this response kind of naturally. And then the third thing that's really significant is that, if we try to breathe through our nose, human beings really struggle with the idea, I'm going to have to adapt to this or slow down. They just want to go out and try to do it in the way that they normally engage in their physical activity. So if I'm a runner who normally runs at 8-minute miles, I try to go out and run at 8-minute miles breathing through my nose. And of course, right away, you're still at that stage not developed to breathe that way. So you're hypoventilating, meaning that you're ventilating less than is necessary to oxygenate your tissues adequately. So what you feel is this extreme air hunger, not from that lack of oxygenation, but because of the increase in CO2 that you experience. And that's like this horror, I'm threatening your life kind of message that stops you right in your tracks. Even if you maybe consciously have thought about the idea that maybe there's something more than this, that's a hard thing to want to reproduce, right? So we never even considered the concept that, well, maybe that goes away, or maybe that's because of the condition of already having developed the ability to work breathing through your mouth. Maybe we could change that. That never really came in anybody's thought process. So a kind of another big idea, and this actually ties back to where I went to grad school. I actually went to the University of Arizona to extend my water polo career, but also because there was a scientist there by the name of Jack Wilmore, who was very well known in exercise science at the time. And he at some point, I think after I was an undergrad, got involved with a scientist, I think his name is Alan Morton over in Australia, who was very interested in asthma. And I think probably they formulated the idea of testing the ability to breathe through your nose, because late in the 70s and early in the 80s, there were some other, I wouldn't call them exercise physiologists, I'd probably call them physicians, who had examined the idea of doing that with people who had asthma, traditional asthma, and found that it actually inhibited their asthmatic response during exercise and run, if we're talking about running, for instance. So that's the first piece, right? The second piece is that when you're breathing nasally and you've adapted to doing this, it's not that you're 22% less because you can't necessarily produce that ventilation. You're actually increasing what you could produce before you adapted to nasal breathing. So we absolutely understand, we're actually doing a study now to look at the full adaptive process. We absolutely understand that you can improve how much ventilation you can achieve nasally. So the main mechanism for that is probably the idea of, using your diaphragm differently. I think you've talked about this in your materials quite a bit. Because nasal breathing requires this higher resistance to be overcome, drawing the air through all the filtering apparatus, we engage our diaphragm differently. We have more use of the diaphragm and less use of the ancillary or intercostal muscles, things like that. We breathe more from the complete lung, the complete thorax, and less from the chest. So that actually is a thing you have to adapt to. An analogy that I think about would be like a cyclist, right? We increase a cyclist's ability to go faster, not only by pedaling faster, but also by increasing the size of the gear that they can pedal. So when you initially try to pedal a bigger gear for a given power output, at first you fatigue, but then your body, your muscles, skeletal muscles, they start to adapt to that. So when you start breathing more at a higher force level, but a little slower, it's sort of like using a bigger gear on a bike. Your diaphragm has to adapt to that, but of course it does. It's a skeletal muscle. It's very adaptable. So partly how we increase our output breathing nasally is by adapting our diaphragm. There's probably also some stuff that's happening in the small muscles that allow you to flare your nose and open your nasal passage. There's probably some things that are happening internally that also allow better nasal airflow. But the big thing is you got to get your diaphragm to be accustomed to that kind of work. So then that gap between what you can produce orally and what you can produce nasally, it reduces. So you don't ever have to achieve what you can produce orally because nasal breathing is so much more efficient.
And when you started teaching, was it mainly I suppose you trained as a yoga instructor and then you started working with students and then you changed kind of directions over the year. You're quite inquisitive.
I am. I'm a curious person. That's just how I'm always wanting to learn more. And I think it's helpful to understand like what came before I started yoga, and kind of got me into it, which was I had chronic health and issues and chronic pain in my body. And I was always sickly as a child, which is all tied into the breath and, meeting you and all that years and years later. If only we had met earlier, but whatever, things happen as they do. So when I started yoga, I was drawn to teachers who were adapting yoga I needed a lot of adaptations. I couldn't just like put my hands down on the floor. I had a very tight body. I had a very deconditioned body. I loved it, but I started injuring myself through the intensity of the physical practices. So I kept having to adapt for myself. And then I was drawn to teachers who had a lot of wisdom and understanding about how to adapt for different body types, as opposed to everybody do it this way. And it made more sense to me. And so I naturally became a teacher that was more fluent in adaptation. And so then who came to me were students like myself, who were not your typical like hyperflexy, I can do anything, I was a dancer, I can move. But the people who were like, I have trouble moving, and I have shoulder issues, and I have back issues, and these kinds of things. So I didn't know it at the time, but I was naturally already drawn towards therapeutic adaptation. So then when I met Gary Kraftstyle, who became my therapeutic yoga teacher and trained me in yoga therapy and certified me in yoga therapy, that was just like a natural fit, because everything was adapted. And in addition to the physical postures, there was a lot of emphasis that he brought into breathing and the effect of the breath on the mind and the effect of the breath on movement and on the heart and the connection to the inner self, and a lot of deep study of yoga philosophy. And so yoga got from then on taken out of the box of it's all about posture and movement and flexibility and all of that hoo-ha, which it's not, and then became this very deep, rich body, mind, heart, soul, practice of transformation. And so from there, I found myself working consistently with people with chronic pain and chronic health issues, and using all the different tools of yoga, to including lifestyle and Ayurveda, to really help them to become more have a greater sense of agency in their own lives, and to feel like they could do, even if they had a condition, they could still feel better as a human being with the condition, a person with a condition, but not defined and limited by that condition, in terms of their sense of well-being. So it's been very rewarding work. And then I became a trainer in yoga therapy, and am very involved in the International Association of Yoga Therapists, working with our profession to bring it into healthcare and have it accepted as a healthcare practice, in not just in the United States, but internationally. So I'm very dedicated to this work, and I love sharing it with yoga teachers who really want to understand the depth and the breadth, not the breath, but also the breath of yoga, what yoga can offer.
And then you had your own journey, okay? You mentioned in terms of chronic pain, and I love the way you talked about you were struggling a little bit yourself, which caused you to start, wondering, is there a different way to do it? And I think that can give you a tremendous experience. The teacher who has been through that and worked their way through it, because if a teacher finds everything so easy, they expect that their students will pick it up so easy. But when we struggle a little bit with our own issues, and when we can help to master them, at least make some progress, we have an in-depth understanding then to help the students who are struggling. I think quite a few people can be struggling, though. It's across all walks of life.
For sure. And I would say the struggles are increasing because of the level of stress that people are carrying in the world. And so all of that stress, that emotional and mental stress, affects how they feel in their body and can make their body and their mind more vulnerable. And then I went to my naturopath, and she had me, breathe into the spirometer, and she was like, "Oh my God, Robin, that's horrible. You have asthma." I'm like, "I do not." She's like, "No, really, you do. This is bad. You need like inhalers. You're not gonna, like, you need steroids. Like you need help, lady." And of course they did help. I'd never used an inhaler in my life. And I've had so many coughing jags for like 20, 30 minutes, like horrible. I've cracked ribs from coughing so hard. So anyway, that got me thinking, the asthma piece, like that she labeled that, it was like, oh, I better call Pippa. It's like immediately, like, I know where to go. I've got to go outside my wheelhouse, because obviously everything I've tried isn't working, and I don't want to be on meds for the rest of my life. Like, something here is off with my breathing. So I started working with her, and that, opened a whole new world. Like everything I'd learned in yoga school about deep, big breaths, like really expanding the chest and the ribs and right. And, we weren't actually exhaling through the mouth, but back then, nobody did that back then. That's a new made up thing that none of my very, very knowledgeable and deeply studied yoga teachers ever taught. It's a new thing. Like new as in I've been practicing for 40 years. None of my teachers in the first 20 years that I was studying regularly, intensively training, nobody ever said breathe through your mouth, ever.
Wow.
It's a new thing, and yoga people, stop it now. It's not yoga, it's not pranayama, and it's not healthy. Patrick and I, both of us, could go into a long lecture on why it's not healthy, but please stop it.
Absolutely. But I'm kind of a little bit intrigued by that. I find that amazing. Now, you know what's coming into my mind though? So you then switched to Buteyko. What was the difference between the Buteyko method and the pranayama that you're teaching? And then the second question that I'm going to ask is, was original pranayama closer to Buteyko than we think?
Yeah.
Did it get lost?
This is actually the reason why I wrote the book, as you know, and so I'm happy to share this. So first of all, what happened to me was literally like night and day. So before I went to see Pippa, it was on a Monday or something, like, let's just say it was Monday. So Saturday, Sunday, and for the 3 months before, I actually had not had a solid night's sleep because I was coughing all night long. Like literally, I tell my husband, go sleep in the guest room because I'm just going to keep you up. I would have to sit up, and I would be sitting up trying to do different pranayamas to stop the bronchial spasms, to stop the tickle, trying everything I knew. And I was just getting more and more exhausted. I was having these horrible coughing jags. Like I said, like I had like the symptoms of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, which had like chased me my whole life.
Rob, and I'm going to step in, as well.
Yeah.
Sorry now, because when you mentioned fibromyalgia, that was actually one of the symptoms of upper airway resistance syndrome, which is tying in with your small airway. Plus, you had breathing issues and you had mouth open and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So of course, I didn't correlate. I came to correlate it all and be like, oh my God, this is what's been like all these different problems throughout my entire life could go back to, and I'm not blaming my mom, but like not being breastfed, like, and not developing my jaw, my tongue, and all these things that we know now are so critically important to health and well-being. But that's just the way my life was set up. And then my dad was a doctor, so prescribing antibiotics was sort of what you did if your kid's sick, and I had all these infections. And so he was doing his best too. They didn't know, right? And meanwhile, feeding me, milk and toast, gluten and dairy in large quantities. And, it's just like, anyway, all not good. My gut biome, everything was just going in the wrong direction. So I can put all those pieces together now, and am happy to help others to not fall down that toboggan run, or have their children go that route too, right? Through education. But in any case, I was having all these symptoms, a lot of brain fog. I mean, it was scary. It was scary to feel so awful again, to wake up and be like so achy and not tired. I mean, wake up, I barely slept. So I go and I do this 2-hour class with Pippa, and I do what she's, I breathe in the class the way that she's telling me to breathe, which is like very little, like tiny breath. And I'm doing these breath holds, and I don't know what it does. It's like so bizarre, but I'm fascinated because my curious mind, like, this is so bizarre. Like, I'm doing this thing and I'm feeling better. Like within 24 hours. I mean, the story. My husband literally said, he was sleeping with me at that point, and he said, you scared me last night. I said, why? He said, you were so quiet, I thought you were dead. Literally, because he was so used to my snoring and my noisiness at night, hearing me breathe all night. And then I was so quiet. So it was dramatic. So within a week, my coughing had reduced by 75%. And when somebody, please understand, if somebody's got a chronic cough, it means they're basically, their insides are being violently agitated, irritated, and inflamed from top to bottom, and it's damaging. I mean, I will go into it as detailed as you want, but honestly, I've had multiple surgeries as a result of chronic coughing. It's not something that you want to just let go for yourself or anybody that you're in contact with.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the not coughing was huge for me, and I started feeling like my brain was clicking on all cylinders again, and I had energy, and I was sleeping better, and I'm like, okay, I need to understand this.
I haven't been back home yet. Yeah, and then I got into running probably a year after I landed in Canada. It started as a mental health tool. I was looking for something to help me out, to process and to kind of clear off my head as I was navigating through these challenges of new country, new language, new culture. And running came off as an affordable sport to do so. You don't need much investment to get into it. And so I started doing some, road runs and here and there, and signed up for a local race and did pretty well in it. And it kind of kept growing from there. And eventually, when pandemic happened, I had to transition to trails just because running on the sidewalks wasn't sort of appropriate. You're supposed to self-isolate, but at the same time, if you're in trails by yourself, you can kind of escape that. And I found my solace there. I found my happy spot there. And ever since I discovered trails, never went back to the roads or road running. And eventually ran into like-minded people, and they basically told me more about the world of ultra running, because by then I didn't even know that people could potentially go over the marathon distance. And from there, I'm like, okay, so I guess we can keep going, and we can run hills, we can run mountains, and trails are so much more fun. And I kept exploring that avenue, started doing longer distances, eventually moved to Western Canada, closer to the mountains, and we have an abundance of beautiful trails right in my backyard. And I kept building up and growing myself as an ultra runner, signed up for these races, did relatively well in most of them, and here I am.
Your typical, I suppose, for people who are listening, the race that was 717 kilometers and you came second, that's going back about 6 months or so, isn't it? Or thereabouts?
Yeah, it was in
October. Can you kind of talk us through that a little bit? What was the terrain? How many competitors was it? Over how many days? Just a little bit of your experience there.
Sure. Yeah, it is a unique format. It's masterminded by Lazarus Lake, same race director as the Barkley Marathons that just happened a couple of weeks ago. So the idea of the race is that you run this loop of 6.7 kilometers or 4.16 miles every hour on an hour until you are either quit or you are the last man standing. So the idea behind the distance is that every 24 hours, you end up running 100 miles and you keep going until you're the last man standing. That's what it's called. Yeah. So what happened in October is that the best ultra runners in this format from all over the world came over to Tennessee, to the actual backyard of Laz, to compete against each other. And we had 75 people from all over the world start at the same time, run. The bell rings, so you got to start on the top of the hour. You have to complete this distance within an hour. If you do it within 40 minutes, great. You got 20 minutes to rest until the next hour. And you can do whatever you want within 20 minutes. But when the bell rings and signals the beginning of the hour, you have to start the loop. And 6.7K doesn't sound like a long distance, but well, if you do it for hours, for days and nights at a time, at the end, it's getting really hard to actually complete this distance within an hour. So many people time out, many people fall asleep, they get delirious, because there's no long-term break. So you can't sleep for hours. You do have a few minutes. If you wish, you can lay down and nap at night or whenever, but then at the top of the hour, you have to start 6.7K. So what happened in Tennessee is that we ended up going 450 miles or 4.5 days. So 5 days and 4 nights, nonstop pretty much. And that was a new world record. And Harvey Lewis, my friend from USA, he was able to get the new world record and cover 450 miles with running
It's
for
nuts.
5 days and 4 nights. Yeah. If you try to kind of process it does sound incredibly a lot. I know it's been 4.5 days or 4 days, 4 nights, but it all seems like it was just a couple seconds in my head now. But it was a pretty incredible journey there. Yeah.
And can I ask, coming towards, say, day 3 and day 4, so you have to do the 4 miles on the hour. Were there times that the 4 miles was taking the entire hour, so you got literally no break before you had to kick off again? Or were you always able to snatch 10 or 15 minutes of sleep or downtime?
Yeah, so we had 2 different courses, day course and night course. Day course was on the trail, and it was a bit technical. There was some climbing involved. So day course would take longer, and I was always trying to bang for 53 minutes, because that's what I've been doing for, at the previous races, and it worked for me. I found that I don't really need too much time in the camp, just because over time, if you spend too much time sitting or laying, your muscles start seizing up, and it gets really hard to get going again. So eventually I found this 53-minute mark is what working for me. So it's enough time to rehydrate, refuel, change shoes, socks if needed, and get going. Whereas at the nighttime, though, we were running on the road, so it was less technical, not much climbing. So we could have covered that distance a bit faster, but not too much faster. I did 49 minutes on average at night. And the idea is that I would have some time to sleep. So I would do the night loop, come to the camp, lay down, sleep for 9 minutes, get up, do it again. So in that way, you kind of try to get some sleep in. I know it's hard to imagine, okay, how do you sleep 9 minutes at a time and can get going? But eventually your brain and your body is so tired that the second you lay down, it just turns off like instantly. I was dreaming. Every time I would nap for 9 minutes, I would dream.
So now I want to bring you into the race itself, because I would sometimes feel with some athletes, the mind can kind of sabotage performance, because the mind is kind of saying, oh God, you're really pushing it. You're not able to do it. You'll never do this. This guy is doing much better than you do. You didn't start off right. How did you find your mind in during the race, or what did you do? Did self-doubts creep in? Thoughts will creep in.
Yeah.
But did you follow them?
There's nothing you can do with those thoughts. I mean,
yes.
Even elite runners, professional runners, they get them. They just know how to deal with them. They in fact, they expect them, and when they arrive, they deal with them. And the thing with ultra running, it's so no matter how strong you are physically, no matter what training block you're gonna put in leading up to the race, eventually you will be in pain. You will be in physical pain. So eventually it will become mental. Pain is good, but pain is basically telling you, hey, something's wrong with your body. I think you need to stop, because what you're doing is hurting. But that's where your mind comes into play, and your mind overrides all the pain, saying, hey, I'm actually racing, I'm trying to accomplish this goal. How about I forget about this pain and I'll keep going and I'll think about it later. And so all the ultra races, they're all mental. Ask anyone. You start with your body, but you finish with your brain. You finish with your heart. You finish with your mental strength, and that is what usually differentiates elite runners, or those that continuously successful in all these tough efforts. And those people come back and they keep doing and they keep achieving these great feats of endurance. That these people are mentally strong. I mean, obviously they're physically strong, but they're mentally, because at the end it's all your brain versus your body, and whoever is gonna win, that's gonna define the way your race is gonna progress and end. So again, when I'm trying to kind of extend this fight later into the race by doing all these, by breathing slow, by breathing in my nose, keeping my heart rate as low as possible, using my nutrition wisely, but eventually you hit the spot where you got to start fighting with your body, and especially in the efforts like going 4 nights, 5 days with no sleep, nonstop running. Your body's gonna get tired. It's not easy. Everything is gonna hurt. Everything is gonna ache. But this is where your mental strength comes into play, where you start overriding all these signals that your body is giving you, and you just stay focused on your final goal.
So that gives you a quick look at the conversations that we've had over the last couple of years. Many different conversations with each person bringing their own unique angle. And again, we'd love to know, what would you like to hear about in 2026? So let us know the topics, the conversation, and we will do our best to deliver. Thanks for a great 2025, and looking forward to, of course, 2026. If you haven't already subscribed, it would be tremendous if you would do that. And on the back of that, we will get more exciting guests, more conversations. We will listen to you, and we will do our best to deliver.
Thank you for listening to the Oxygen Advantage podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and maybe take the time to leave us a review. The Oxygen Advantage podcast is available from all your podcast providers.